On April 2, 2025, President Donald J. Trump made a dramatic declaration from the White House. This is Liberation Day. The phrase marked more than a symbolic return to power. It signaled the formal launch of a new economic strategy, an aggressive protectionist trade doctrine centered on sweeping reciprocal tariffs aimed at foreign competitors and even longtime allies. What followed was a rapid unraveling of global economic stability. Markets plunged. World leaders issued urgent rebukes. Multinational companies scrambled to reassess their operations. Trump's bold move placed the United States at the center of a trade shock, unlike anything seen since the post-war era. Standing beside Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, President Trump unveiled a tariff package that represented the most significant shift in U.S. trade policy in decades. The new measures included a 25% tariff on all foreign manufactured automobiles, a 10% base tariff on most other imported goods, and additional sector-specific levies targeting countries with large trade surpluses, with the U.S. citing what he described as decades of economic abuse. Trump argued that these tariffs were not only justified, but long overdue. "Every country's calling us now," he told reporters aboard Air Force One. The U.S. is finally in the driver's seat. At the heart of the doctrine is a concept Trump refers to as reciprocal fairness. If a country imposes high tariffs or barriers on U.S. goods, the U.S. will now match or exceed them. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, speaking from Uzbekistan, called the move a major blow to the global economy. Uncertainty will spiral, protectionism will rise, the global economy will massively suffer. The EU is preparing countermeasures, including tariffs on US tech products, agricultural exports, and luxury goods.
President Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer. Uncertainty will spiral and trigger the rise of further protectionism.
In London, Prime Minister Keir Starmer acknowledged the deep economic ties between the UK and the US, but warned nobody wins in a trade war. "We will continue negotiating for a balanced prosperity deal." The UK, which has been seeking a bilateral trade agreement with Washington, now finds itself caught between diplomacy and domestic economic pressure.
Nobody wins in a trade war. That is not in our national interest. We have a fair and balanced trade relationship with the US. Negotiations on an economic prosperity deal, one that strengthens our existing trading relationship, they continue, and we will fight for the best deal for Britain.
In Berlin, Chancellor Olaf Scholz condemned the US action as an assault on the international trade order. "This is an attack on a trade system that created prosperity across the world," he said. "American consumers will pay a heavy price." Germany's powerful auto sector, which exports hundreds of thousands of vehicles to the US each year, is among the hardest hit.
Die jüngsten Zollentscheidungen des US-Präsidenten halte ich für grundfalsch. Das ist ein Anschlag auf eine Handelsordnung, die Wohlstand überall auf dem Globus geschaffen hat. Eine Handelsordnung, die ganz wesentlich auch das Ergebnis amerikanischer Bemühungen ist. Die gesamte Weltwirtschaft wird unter diesen undurchdachten Entscheidungen leiden. Unternehmen wie Verbraucherinnen und Verbraucher überall in der Welt, auch in den USA.
France President Emmanuel Macron, speaking from Cognac, labeled the tariffs brutal and unfounded, particularly as they target traditional allies. France's cognac industry, among others, faces major disruptions as tariffs threaten access to the US market.
La décision qui a été annoncée cette nuit est une décision brutale et infondée. Elle est infondée parce qu'on ne corrige pas des déséquilibres commerciaux en mettant des tarifs. Et les bases de la théorie économique montrent le contraire, surtout d'ailleurs quand les déséquilibres ne prennent pas en compte les services numériques, pour ne citer qu'eux ou d'autres.
Mexico President Claudia Sheinbaum responded with a clear message. "Our objective is for most vehicles consumed in Mexico to be manufactured in Mexico. Mexico is now accelerating industrial policies to localize production and reduce dependency on U.S. assembly lines.
Fortalecer y ampliar la fabricación nacional para el mercado interno de vehículos, robusteciendo innovación, investigación y desarrollo, así como eficiencia energética. Tenemos ya el plan, hemos hablado con la industria automotriz. El objetivo es que la mayor parte de los vehículos que se consumen en México sean fabricados en nuestro país, con diálogo con los distintos países del mundo.
Prime Minister Mark Carney, speaking from Ontario, struck a nuanced tone. This is a tough move by the US, but also an enormous opportunity for Canada to scale up domestic manufacturing. Still, the economic pain was immediate. Stellantis announced 900 job cuts across 5 US and Canadian sites, while several Ontario-based auto suppliers halted production pending further clarity.
On one level, what's going on with the tariffs, and we got, as you know, the auto tariffs this week from the United States. That's tough. But this is an enormous opportunity for this company, for this country, and I think ultimately for America.
Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba expressed disappointment and concern, saying, "Japan has been the largest foreign investor in the United States since 2019. Japanese automakers like Honda and Toyota, which operate major US plants, are now reassessing supply chains." The Tokyo Stock Exchange dropped sharply amid fears of reduced exports and economic slowdown.
我が国は2019年以来、世界最大の対米投資国であります。で、日本企業は米国経済に多大の役割を果たしてまいりましたし、今もそうです。
Factory workers in Vietnam and Cambodia voiced concern over job losses as US tariffs threatened key export categories like garments and electronics. Analysts warn of rising unemployment in these economies if American demand continues to drop. On April 4th, Beijing announced retaliatory measures. The Tariff Commission of the State Council imposed a 34% tariff on all US goods entering China. Additional restrictions targeting American technology firms and agriculture exports were also put in place. Beijing accused the US of economic aggression and warned of a prolonged confrontation if Washington does not de-escalate.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry said that the market has spoken when asked about the tariffs. What do you make of that?
The market has spoken when they look at the fact that we have $1 billion trade deficit. When you look at the trade deficit that we have with certain countries, way over $1 billion per country. But with China, it's $1 trillion. And we have to solve our trade deficit with China. We have $1 trillion trade deficit with China. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year we lose with China. And unless we solve that problem, I'm not going to make a deal. Now, I'm willing to deal with China, but they have to solve their surplus. We have a tremendous deficit problem with China. They have a surplus of at least $1 trillion a year. I think it's like $1.1 trillion. And I want that solved. And so China is, they say the market's spoken. The market, China is right now taking a big hit because everyone knows we're right. No, that's not so. But I do want to solve the deficit problem that we have with China, with the European Union and other nations. And they're going to have to do that. And if they want to talk about that, I'm open to talking. But otherwise, why would I want to talk? It was largely true. The report is that we had a deal pretty much with Tic-Tac. Not a deal, but pretty close. And then China changed the deal because of tariffs. If I gave a little cut in tariffs, they'd approve that deal in 15 minutes. Which shows you the power of tariffs, right?
Financial market turmoil. The Nasdaq Composite entered a bear market. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell into correction territory. Japanese banking stocks plummeted amid fears of recession. South Korea's KOSPI dropped to its lowest point since February. Currency markets also showed signs of strain, with the dollar initially strengthening before facing downward pressure from volatility in global capital flows. Sector-level impact. French cognac exports to the US face near total suspension due to retaliatory duties. Canadian auto plants have begun workforce reductions in anticipation of reduced demand. US car manufacturers like Ford and GM are bracing for parts shortages and cost increases. Garment producers in Southeast Asia are warning of mass layoffs unless exemptions are negotiated. On April 5th, Trump doubled down on his approach via Truth Social. We are bringing back jobs and businesses like never before. Already, more than $5 trillion of investment. This is an economic revolution. Hang tough. The end result will be historic. His message to the American public: endure short-term hardship for long-term gain. President Trump's Liberation Day marks a defining moment in the global economic landscape. What began as a tariff announcement has evolved into a confrontation that may reshape trade relations for years to come. Whether this strategy brings about renewed industrial strength for the United States or sparks a prolonged global recession will depend on how other nations respond, how supply chains adapt, and how resilient consumers remain under rising costs. For now, the world waits, markets watch, and global leaders prepare for what could become the most consequential trade war of the 21st century.